Okay, so we are about halfway down Tezayin Amud Bays, 16b2, the bottom of the first column. So what we ended up with last week is that someone's able to make an Erev Tavshilin for all residents of his city. That's what we said. So Hahu Samya to have him Sadar Masnisa Kamei Shmuel. There was a certain blind person who used to arrange the Mishnayos in front of the Master Shmuel. So meaning he memorized the Mishnayos. And if we can't in those days, well, according to some opinions, they could have had a book of Mishnayos to take off the shelf to look at. Well, it would have been a manuscript, a handwritten thing. According to some opinions, when Rabbi Huda Nasi composed the Mishnayos, it was still only in oral form. So even if the opinion was it could have been written, it was very expensive to have and time consuming to write, to get parchment, because in a paper, and to have Mishnayos, so they still had people who memorized it. Then you needed something, you asked them. So there actually is significance to the fact that this person was blind. It is not proper to recite psukim by heart. Torah B'Ksav should be read. Torah B'al Peh should be memorized. So I think they mentioned about Rav Yosef. Maybe it wasn't Rav Yosef, but it's certainly applicable here. This person probably uh, uh, focused on memorizing the Mishnayos because it wasn't proper to recite Tanakh Bal Peh, but Mishnayos was perfect. So for people who weren't able to see, uh, it was a very good thing to memorize the Mishnayos and be a resource that way. Chazia de Hava Atziv. So Shmuel saw that he was sad. Amar Le, my Atziva, so he said, why are you upset? Amar Le, he said, Lo Asive Iruv Tavshilin. I didn't leave an Erev Tavshilin. So he wasn't going to be able to cook for Shabbos. So Amar Le, Smoch Adidi. So Shmuel said, you could rely on my Erev Tavshilin that I made for the whole community. Lashana Chazia de Hava Atziv. The next year he saw that he was sad again. So Rashi, for some reason, says that it was Rosh Hashanah the next year. And others ask why Rashi has to say that. So I'm sure there's answers I don't have right now, but so Amar Le, Amay Atzivas, why are you sad? Amar Le, Delo Siva Erev Tavshalan. I didn't leave an Erev Tavshalan. Amar Le, Shmuel said, Posheat, you are negligent. The Kuli Amashari, for everyone else, they're allowed to rely to cook because they can rely on mine. About Ladidach Aser. But for you, you can't rely on my Erev Tavshilin. Rashi says I didn't have intent for people who intentionally or negligently didn't make an Erev Tavshilin, who aren't charedim l'divrei chachamim. They're not. Danny, how would you translate chared l'divrei chachamim? The meaning of the word charedi. What would you say the English translation is? Concern. It's a pasuk. It comes from a pasuk in Nach. But if the fact that you're not relying on Haftorah.
Haftarah last week of the Torah. This one was in the Torah portion.
I think it was a Haftorah.
Okay, I'll check.
Yeah, let's look it up.
Okay.
What?
You don't care.
Yeah, it's a little stronger than that, but yeah, that's what it means. Yeah.
That's not like he's shaking. It wasn't the Torah portion. No, console. Shaking.
At the end of Mishpatim?
Well, I'll have to look it up.
when we received the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kolosus
yeah,
alapidim.
yeah.
Vayanu.
What do you mean?
Where the word Haredim is in Nach.
Well, from where?
They're shaking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's in the Chumash. There is. It is in when Yitzchak gave the bracha to Yaakov. V'yacharad Yitzchak charad gedola. He was shaking, but it's Yeshaya Samach Vav. The end. I think it's Yom Kippur. Shimud Hashem Acharedim El Devaro. Yeshaya Samach Vav. Yeah, we read it on Yom Kippur. Oh no, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Those who are zealous regarding his words, it has to be that you're in awe of him. So you're shaking out of awe. So if the words of the Chazal aren't that important to you that you keep forgetting about it, I didn't have in mind that my Erev Tafshilin would cover you. Okay, Taner Rabbanan, Yom Tov Shcholios Berev Shabbos. Oh, so Rashi points out that the reason that Rashi says the reason that that he holds it was Rosh Hashanah and not a different holiday is because if it's not Rosh Hashanah, there's the opinion that we saw that on the first day you could say if today's really Yontif, I don't need an Erev Tavshilin. I'm making an Erev Tavshilin now. And if today is not Yontif and really Friday is Yontif, so I'm making Erev Tavshilin now, it'll work for Friday. And if Yontif is really now, I don't really need an Erev Tavshilin for tomorrow, so I can cook anyway tomorrow for Shabbos. You make a tanai like that to make your Erev Tavshilin. So, but Rosh Hashanah is one long kedusha. That only works when there's the day and the Sveika Yom day. But Rosh Hashanah, so did we mention? I think we mentioned a while ago that there's a machlokas Rishonim, or some of it goes back to the Gaonim. If Rosh Hashanah in Eretz Yisrael, did they keep one day of Rosh Hashanah or 2 days of Rosh Hashanah?
Ooh.
It's a machlokas Rishonim. We hold that it's two, but there are Rishonim who say in their time, 1,000 years ago, they say in Eretz Yisrael they only keep one day of Rosh Hashanah. But even according to opinions that it's 2 days, it's that because it's one kedusha, or because we didn't know which day would be Rosh Chodesh. Even there, we said when there's no Beis Din, you keep it for 2 days. You keep it for 2 days, so it's one kedusha. So you can't make this thing if it's not today, because no, for Rosh Hashanah it's the same kedusha both days. Ketan Rabbanan Yom Tov Shcholios Berev Shabbos. If Yom Tov fell on Friday, in Ma'arvin lo eruv tchumin v'lo eruv chatzeros, you're not allowed to make an erev tchumin. So you could go up to 2,000 amos, whatever, past the city limits. You can make a certain place and leave some food there, and that extends uh, your ability to travel further. Now, when I was at Kirby Avnet, well, it's still there, I'm pretty sure. Well, except that they changed the road, so maybe that changed. There was some type of army base that was walkable, but you had to make the Erev Tchumim before Shabbos if you were going to go walk there on Shabbos. So one year I came back in the summer, a few years after I was there. It was summer, weren't so many guys. They needed someone to go to give the Dvar Torah, so I volunteered to do it, and but then they had someone else. So I ended up not going. But in the process, they told me, "Oh, you'd have to make you have to set up Erev Tchumim to go there on Shabbos." So that's the closest I've ever been to making Erev Tchumim. I was supposed to go to my uncle in Beit Shemesh. I said, I'm gonna have to cancel you because I had this opportunity." He was very excited about my opportunity, but it ended up they didn't need me. So you're not allowed to make an Erev Tchumen on Yantif, even when Yantif is Friday. V'lo eruv chatzero, so not an Erev Chatzeros. So an Erev Chatzeros is people in the same courtyard uh, can't carry to each other unless there's an eruv chatzeros, which is also collecting bread or from everyone and putting it in one of the common areas. So that shows that everyone in the chatzer is like one happy family. So you could carry from one living space in the chatzer to a different one within the same chatzer. Rabbi Omer. So meaning you can't do it on Yantif. You can't make this Erev Chatzeros or Erev Tchumim on Yantif. It has to be made on Chol. You make it Erev Yantif or Erev. Well, actually, but so it happens to be, and in order to have an Erev in the city, there has to be an Erev Chatzeros, and they use matzah, and they have it in a certain place, and once a year they replace it. I don't know where the Erev in Skokie is kept, and in Kirby Avna I know where the Erev was kept, but I don't know where it's kept in Skokie. I did hear or see in a place when they say, if you try why you need to have experienced people make eruv is that a certain place they made an eruv, but they didn't have permission from the mayor or the local government. No, but even if you use wires, you have to have permission. So in Skokie, they have a proclamation hanging up from the mayor Gorel. I don't think she died yet, did she?
I think so.
It's hanging up in Ortora. Hopefully, it's still hanging up there. You do have to renew it. It's not good. It doesn't last in perpetuity. And you also have to make the matzahs the eruv chatzeros. And some people say they made a good eruv, but they forgot that detail, and it's a very important detail because it doesn't work without that. So you can't make the Erev Tchumim or Erev Chatzeros on Yantif. It has to be made during the week. If Yantif happen, well, we'll see the next few lines. Rabbi Omer Ma'arvim Me'ruba Chatzeros. You're allowed to make an Erev Chatzeros on Yantif. Let's say if Yantif is Friday, you can make the Erev Chatzeros on Friday for Shabbos. Avalo Eruv Tchumim, but you're not allowed to make an Erev Tchumim to extend past the city limits on Yantif. Mipnei Sha'ata Osra B'Davar Ha'asr Lo. Because you're making something forbidden with something that's already forbidden to him. So you have the power to forbid on him from doing something for tomorrow, something which is forbidden on that day, meaning because Tchumim applies to Yantav also. So since you can't, so in order to make the Erev Tchumim, when it's weekday, you're doing something that's allowing him to walk on Shabbos. But on Yantif, you couldn't go past it either. So on Yantif, when you can't go past the Tchum, you can't set up a mechanism to go past the Tchum either. That's what this means. Mipnei shata osra b'davar asur lo. V'iyata osra b'davar hamuter lo. So you could forbid him from doing something that's already forbidden. You can't say that he can make a mechanism to go beyond the tchum on the day that he already can't go beyond the tchum. But on a day of collecting food or carrying the food, you're allowed to do that on Yantif. So you're allowed to make an eruv chatzeros on Yantif. That's Rebbe's opinion. Rabbi Huda Nasi. Itmar, we learned Rav Amar halacha Tanakama. Rav says we pass like the Tanakama that you're not allowed to make an eruv chatzeros or an eruv tavshilin on Shabbos. On Yantif Friday, and that's how we paskin. Shmuel Amar halacha Rebbe. Shmuel says we paskin like Rebbe, but we paskin. So Danny, I mentioned this to you before. The Gemara often doesn't say how we paskin. Here it says v'hilchasa. However, sometimes when it says there's a machlokas of what the halacha is. So for Rav and Shmuel, we paskin like Rav and Isurim. So we paskin the way Rav said. So now the Gemara says, well, what's the limits of passing like Rebbe in this situation? according to Shmuel, Ibailahu halacha k'Rebbe lakula o lachumra. When we say that halacha is like Rebbe, does it mean as a kula, as a leniency, and you're allowed to make an eruve chatzeros an yantav o lachumra, or to be strict? So pshita lakula amar. But it's simple that it has to be a leniency, because what stringency would there be if we had paskin like Rebbe? Mishum, so the reason that the Gemara is asking, Mishum, because the Shalach Rebbe Lazar Lagola, Rebbe Lazar sent us a message to Bavel. He had a shaila, he didn't know the answer to it, so he sent it to the Chachamim in Bavel. Lo, or no, he didn't have the question. He wanted to tell them that they were wrong about something. He wanted to set the record straight. Lo kshatem shonim beBavel. It's not like you teach in Bavel. Rabbi Mater Chachamim Osrim, that Rabbi allows the Eruch Hatzeros to be made, and the Chachamim say that you can't. Ella Rabbi Osrim Chachamim Matirim. They had the Girsa was the opposite. Rabbi was the one who says you can't, and the Chachamim says the one that it's mutter. So when we paskin like Rabbi, that means you can't make an Eruch Hatzeros either on Yantif. So when Shmuel paskin like Rabbi, which Girsa was he paskin like Rabbi? I don't know why the Gemara didn't ask it against Rav. Oh, the art scroll in footnote 28 says that from the Sfas Emes, the Ger Rebbe. The Gemara could have made the identical inquiry regarding Rav's ruling. What? Shmuel says like halacha? Okay, I'm very confused here right now. I have to look here later. Tashma. So we'll learn from a certain Braisa. Rav Tachlifa Rav Avdimi Avad Uvda Kavasi Dishmuel. Rav Tachlifa Rav Dume paskin like Shmuel. Amar Rav, and then Rav, who argued on Shmuel, said the first psak of this young Talmid Chacham has been to make things worse. So Kavan the Mekakle Barabe. So Iyamar Bishlam Makula Ka'amar. If Shmuel's opinion was saying that halacha karebi that you're allowed to make an eruv chatzeros on Yantif, so Rav Tachlifa Barav Dimi paskin leniency. He told his people you're allowed to make an eruv chatzeros on Yantif on Friday, and Rav says it was a terrible psak. He made a mistake. His psak was wrong. Haino kukula, we understand the bad thing that happened from his psak. But if Shmuel, the Rabbi's opinion was really you're not allowed to do either, what's the big problem? They didn't do anything wrong. He said you're not allowed to make it. And they could have made it, but he said they didn't. So they didn't make it. Why is it a kukula? Why is it making things bad of a mistake if he paskin that they couldn't do something that they could? So the Gemara says, Kevan the Mekakale Barabim. Since people can make a mistake, Rashi says the mistake is normally they make an eruv chatzeros. He paskin they weren't allowed to make an eruv chatzeros this week, and people are used to it, and by mistake they carried without there being an eruv there because of that. So Hainel Kukula, that we turn to Yud Zayin Amar Aleph, that is what the mistake was. It wasn't what they did based on his ruling, but based on his ruling, that because there was no eruv, people ended up carrying on Shabbos there.
So this is when Yom Tov before Shabbos.
Friday.
Right.
And so the question is, can you make the eruv chatzeros on Friday? Yantif.
What if Yom Tov starts on Motzei Shabbos?
It's not in regard to what? There's no problem of eruv chatzeros because before Shabbos you would make an eruv chatzeros, and for an eruv tchumim, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. We'll see in the next few lines. Do we see it again? We're going to see it in the next few lines, I think. So Amar Rava, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Huna. Rava said in the name of. So we don't have an answer here clearly. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Huna. Rava said in the name of Rav Chisda, name of Rav Huna. Halacha Rabbi Velasar. We passing like Rabbi, and we do that. It's usher to make an erev chatzeros on Friday Yantif. Yeah, I feel like I'm forgetting something here. Let me check something. Oh, so there's something from a Tosfos I wanted to mention. Oh, it's not here. Okay. So I had something I don't see it right now. Okay. Tanarabana, we learned in a brayso. So this is slightly off topic now, not about Erev Tavshilin. Yom Tov Shechol Yos b'Shabbos. Um, when Shabbos is also Yantif. Beishama Yomer Mispal Shmona. In Shmona Esrei, we make 8 brachas for Amr Shal Shabbos b'fnei atzma, Shal Yantif b'fnei atzma. So we know that for our Shabbos, we make the first 3 brachos. We make one brach in the middle which ends mekadesh Shabbos, and then we make the last 3 ritzei and modem and some shalom or shalom rov. So according to Beis Shammai, when it's Shabbos and Yantif, you make 2 brachos in the middle because you make one bracha just for Shabbos and one bracha just for Yantif. And we know we don't do it that way. Beis Hillel Omer Misbalo Shava. We say 7 brachos. Maskal b'shel Shabbos, Misinai b'shel Shabbos. You start that middle bracha talking about Shabbos. You end with Shabbos. Va'omer kedusha seyom be'emtza, and you mention the Yantif kedusha seyom, the sanctity day of the Yantif in the middle. Rashi says his text was Vatitin leno Hashem Elokeinu es yom hamenucha hazeh v'es yom chag ploni hazeh. Hashem gave us this day of rest and the day of holiday acts. You know, Yom well, if it's Yom HaZikaron, Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaSukkos, Zman Matan Torseinu. Rabbi Omer, and Rabbi says, Av chosim b'mekadesh Shabbos yisrael vehazmanim. So third opinion, Rabbi says, we don't just end, according to Beis Hillel, the bracha is just for Shabbos. Rabbi says, no, you end mekadesh Shabbos yisrael vehazmanim. He sanctified Shabbos and Yisrael and the time, meaning the holiday. Tani Tana Kaved Ravina. So Tana said in front of Ravina. So when it says Tani Tana, it seems to be the Tana who was similar to the blind person we had on Amud Aleph was reciting the Mishnayos. This Tana was the person whose job was to say over the Mishnayos. Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbos vehazmanim. So when he was saying over the Mishnah, he said Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbos vehazmanim. So the Beitza that we had it, you say Mekadesh HaShabbos, he sanctifies Shabbos, comma Yisrael, comma and the times. But when this Tana said it over, Now, this Tana wasn't a Tana. He lived in the time of Amoraim, but because his job was to repeat the Mishnayos, the title was Tana, not that he was a Tana. He said mekadesh yisrael, then Shabbos, then Zmanim. Amar Le, Ravina said to him, Atu Shabbos Yisrael mekachila. Does Shabbos become sanctified by Yisrael? HaShabbos mekacha v'kaima. Shabbos becomes holy by itself. Every 7 days is Shabbos. Meaning the Yomim Tovim we know needs to be sanctified by Yisrael because they're dependent on days of the month. Uh-oh. What's wrong? Ravina says the Girsa has to be Hashem sanctify Shabbos and Yisrael and the Zmanim. Rav Yosef halacha Rabbi Chataretz Ravina. Rav Yosef says we pass like Rabbi that we make the bracha. We mention Shabbos and Yom Tov together, and as Ravina says that you mention mekadesh Shabbos first and then Yisrael vehazmanim. So Rashi says, through the Kedusha of Yisrael, because Yisrael made the months holy, then we have the month. And without the month, we wouldn't have the holiday. So Rashi holds that it's not that necessarily we make the Yom Tov holy, but we make the Chodesh holy by the Beis Din declaring Rosh Chodesh. And by having Rosh Chodesh, B'meila, we have the Yomim Tovim. And there's a Rashba in the Shita Mekubetzes in Bava Basra, who springs from the Rach, Rabbeinu Hananel, that no, Beis Din is mekadesh the Yomim Tovim themselves directly, not just the Chodesh, the way Rashi says. The Shita Mekubetzes is on the Kuf Chaf. What is it? Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Moadei Hashem Trichim Kiddush Beis Din, the Gemara says. The festivals of Hashem need sanctification from Beis Din. Pirish Rash. So in Bava Basra, in this page, Rashi died in the middle of the second chapter, I think, of Bava Basra. So the rest of Bava Basra is the Pirish of the Rashbam. And that's probably one of the reasons Bava Basra is so long. The Rashbam has a much, much wordier style than Rashi. Rashi is always very concise. And we saw this a little bit when we learned Arvei Psachim. It has Rashi on the top and the Rashbam at the bottom and Tosafot on the other side. Rashbam in there a lot of the time says the same thing as Rashi, but in 3 times as many words. So it's possible that Bava Basra is so much longer because there's less Gemara to fit on the page because there was no Rashi and the commentary they put was a more wordier commentary. So the Rashbam said that all the festivals by themselves, the festivals themselves don't need to be sanctified, but Rosh Chodesh that gets sanctified. And once we know when Rosh Chodesh is, we know when the holidays is. And that seems to be, and that's why when they based in the Sanhedrin declared Rosh Chodesh, they said Mekudash, and the other Dayanim repeated, or the other people were there replied Mekudash, Mekudash. It's sanctified, it's sanctified. And that seems to be the same opinion as Rashi here. And the Rashba here brings the Rach, Rabbeinu Hananel, Moadei Hashem Trichon Kiddush based in Ki Moshe Rabbeinu sanctified them, as it says, Vaydaber Moshe es Moadei Hashem al Bnei Yisrael. That's Parshas Amor. Dibur Zak Kiddush Hamodos who be Mipnei Moshe. So for Moshe, we see that the Beis Din actually has to sanctify the festivals themselves. We see that the festivals themselves need sanctification from Beis Din to set them as Yom Tov and to say the festival is going to be on this sanctified day. So what exactly they do, we're not so sure. We know that Beis Din had to be mekadesh a yovel in order for the slaves to go free. We made a special thing. It's not exactly clear what what the Sanhedrin did to make every Yontif holy. Okay, now Rav Yashabir's opinion is, and that according to Rashi, Yisrael are mekadesh vehazmanim by declaring Rosh Chodesh, and they say that the Chodesh is mekudash, and once we know when the Chodesh is, we know when the Chag is. The Rach, Rabbeinu Hananel, holds that the Sanhedrin actually had to be mekadesh the Chag itself. This day is the Chag, not just this day is Rosh Chodesh, and now we know that on Tezvav the Chamishasar Yom LaChodesh, Hashvi Azeh. So I'm saying we don't know exactly what it is, but according to the Rach, the Sanhedrin used to make the holiday itself mekudash. Now, Rav Yashabir's opinion is that if Shabbos is on Yantif, every time you mention Yantif, you have to mention Shabbos with it. So according to Rav Yashabir, in yaaleh veyavo, let's say Pesach was Shabbos, or Rosh Hashanah was Shabbos, es Yom HaShabbos, yaaleh veyavo. We never mention Shabbos in yaaleh veyavo. According to Rav Yashabir, you had to mention Yom HaShabbos is Yom Chag HaMatzos is. Whenever you mention the Yantif, you also have to mention Shabbos. I mean, I don't know what his source is. I never heard it from anyone, and the only place I saw it was in the Rav Yashabir Machzer for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I don't know if his reason is from this Gemara, and he read it very carefully. According to Rabbi, you can have, or according to Beis Hillel, well, we don't pass Beis Hillel because like Rabbi, but Rabbi is based on Beis Hillel. It seems to me that Rabbi's opinion is the same as Beis Hillel, that you mentioned Shabbos and Yantif together. The only thing that he distinguishes is that, whereas according to Beis Hillel, you would just say mekadesh HaShabbos. According to Rabbi, and we pass like Rabbi, you say mekadesh HaShabbos yisrael b'yom whatever. Vehazmanim. Mekadesh HaShabbos yisrael vehazmanim. There is an opinion I should mention, the Baal, but it's the Torah Tamima. So the Torah Tamima died around 1941. I don't think he wasn't killed in the Holocaust. He died. He was very elderly at the time, but he held that we didn't actually say mekadesh HaShabbos. So according to almost everyone, we do it doesn't matter for whatever Yantif is, we say mekadesh yisrael vehazmanim, or mekadesh HaShabbos yisrael vehazmanim. The kedusha of all Yomim Tovim are the same kedusha. Tosfos on the previous summit at the bottom of the Zayin Amud Aleph asks, according to Rabbi, is the kedusha of Shabbos and kedusha of Yantif the same thing? But that's not what I want to talk about right now. But because the kedusha, there's one kedusha called Shabbos, one kedusha called, Yom Tov. So Pesach is Yom Tov, Shavuos is Yom Tov, Sukkot is Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah is Yom Tov. So we say mekadesh yisrael vehazmanim. It doesn't matter which Yom Tov it is. We just say mekadesh yisrael vehazmanim. The Torah Tamima's opinion was that, but we don't have to mention the name of the Yom Tov in the bracha. Within in the yaaleh veyavo, we mentioned specifically which Yom Tov it is. Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaKippurim, Chag HaMatzot, Chag HaShavuot, Chag HaSukkot. The Torah Tamima's opinion is that the printers did that to save a little ink. That they wrote Zmanim in general, but on Pesach you say, mekadesh Shabbos Chag HaMatzos, and on Sukkot you say mekadesh Yisrael Zman Matan Torah Seinu, and we don't pass like him. But that's an opinion of the Torah Tamima. Panarabanan. Okay, so in the Gemara we're about 13 lines down at the two dots, and 17a1, the very end, the last paragraph on that 17a1. Panarbana, we learned in the Beitza, Shabbos shachal yos Rosh Chodesh shachal shamoed. What happens when Shabbos is on Rosh Chodesh or Chol Hamoed? Arvis v'shachris and mincha mispal shava. Marav Shachris Mincha, you say 7 brachos. Va'omer me'ein ha'ma'ora ba'avoda. And you mentioned the special day in avoda, which is what we do in ritzei. Ritzei means a service of that we offer be accepted by Hashem, and we be able to do the avoda in Yerushalayim. That bracha is called avoda, and that's when we say, and we know we say yaaleh veyavo in that paragraph, right? So in that paragraph, you mentioned the me'ein ha'ma'ora. So me'ein ha'ma'ora is like the event, or a concise thing of the event. So that's where we mentioned that it's yantif in yaaleh veyavo in avoda. So you make the regular Shabbos Shmona Esrei, and if it's Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, you mention you say yaaleh veyavo and mention Rosh Chodesh in that bracha. It's not meaning yantif itself. When the day is actually yantif, we have the machlokes Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Rabbi. It has to be mentioned in the middle of Shmona Esrei. But if it's only Rosh Chodesh or Chol HaMoed, it doesn't need its own bracha. We only mention it in what we call yaaleh veyavo in the bracha of avoda ritzei. V'imlo amar machzir noso, and if you didn't say it, you have to repeat Shmona Esrei. We know that's halacha. If you forget yaaleh veyavo, you have to repeat Shmona Esrei. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Bahodah. Rabbi Eliezer says we say it in modim, not in ritzei, but one bracha later. Okay, so if you remembered before you ended Shmona Esrei, you go back to ritzei, and if you the beginning of ritzei, and if you already finished Shmona Esrei, you have to say the whole Shmona Esrei over again. So basically, because even though Shmona Esrei has 3 sections, the first 3 brachos, then the middle bracha on Shabbos, it's 1 bracha. During the week, it's 13 brachos, and then the last 3. So if you make a mistake in the first 3, you have to start always at the beginning. Even Hamelach HaKadosh, you have to start back at the beginning. And for the last, if you forgot yaaleh veyavo, if you didn't finish Shmona Esrei yet, you start back at ritzei. So you could start the last 3 as one unit again, and say ritzei and yaaleh veyavo, and then you're good. If you finish Shmona Esrei and then you realize you forgot yaaleh veyavo, then you have to start from the beginning.
But not for mine.
Not for Marav. Oh, okay. Jeff is making a diuk in the Gemara here, because the Gemara says Arvis Shachris Milcham Isbal Sheva Omer Meina Bar Bavoda Vimlo Amar Machzir Nosa. If you didn't say it, we have to repeat. And Jeff is making a good diuk. He's saying that according to the Gemara, even in Marav you have to. So we don't paskin that way, but you're right. From this Gemara, it sounds that way. But from a different Gemara, it says because, well, it's from a different Gemara, but it's very astute of you. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Bauda. Rabbi Eliezer says we say yaaleh veyavo in the modem bracha, not in the ritzei bracha, but in modem bracha. Uva musafim. And what about in musaf? If it's Shabbos Chol HaMoed or Shabbos Rosh Chodesh in musaf, that we don't say yaaleh veyavo in musaf. Maschel b'shel Shabbos or Messiah b'shel Shabbos v'amr kedushas yom be'emtza. So the Tanakama says, similar to Beis Shammai's opinion of Shabbos Yantif, the middle bracha is for Shabbos, and the bracha is about Shabbos. And you mentioned Kedushas Hayom, whether it was Rosh Chodesh or Chol HaMoed in the middle. Now, why did it change from the word Me'ein HaMa'ora to Kedushas Hayom? I do not know. Because both cases, we were talking about mentioning the Rosh Chodesh or the Chol HaMoed of the Yom Tov. Why in one place it calls it Me'ein HaMa'ora, the other place it calls it Kedushas Hayom, I don't know, and it bothers me a little bit. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Shmuel ben Osh, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Omerim, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, say, Kol Mokom Shehusuk L'Shava, whenever we have 7 brachos, so even Marav and Shachris and Mincha, Rashi says what he means by that. Maschel b'shel Shabbos, u'mesayim b'shel Shabbos, v'omer kedushas hayom be'emtza. So in the Musaf, You start with Shabbos, you end with Shabbos, and you mention the other holiday in the middle. Amru Rav Huna ein halacha ka'osu azud. Rav Huna says we don't pass like that pair. Meaning because it was two Tanaim, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Shlomo ben Osh, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Yeah, you went too far ahead. Oh. Very excited. Come up to the Zuruk of the Sheva. מתחיל של שבת וצם של שבת. פתאום באמצע, אבל רב אין הלכה לאותו הזו. Rashi points out that even though on this fact we only have this machlokas rishon, machlokas tanaim, Rashi points out that we pass like Rabbi at the top of the Amud for Musaf also. That for Musaf, we will end the brach and Musaf mekadesh Shabbos yisrael vehazmanim, or mekadesh yisrael v'rashei chadash v'Shabbos v'yisrael v'rashei chadashim. So you could say that the zug. So Rashi actually. The fact that it's two Tanaim doesn't necessarily make it a pair. You could say that Rashi learns. I mean, we know that we don't pass like the pair of the opinions in this brisa. We don't pass like either of them. Not like the Tanakama, and not like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Yishmael ben Osh, Rabbi Yochanan. We don't pass like either of them. Okay, so there's one thing I wanted to mention. Rav Yashaber has a yortzeit chair. He asked a lot of obvious questions about Shabbos. In Musaf, this is a little bit off the why do we mention in Musaf az misinai nitzav olah? We were commanded about Shabbos at Har Sinai, but we know the Gemara tells us in Mara we were already commanded on about keeping Shabbos. There's other questions. And then he asked a bunch of questions about Kiddush. It says you make Kiddush on Friday night, and there's a machlokas rishonim. If you forgot to make Kiddush on Friday night, you're allowed to make Kiddush on Shabbos day. Or some say you have to make Kiddush on Shabbos day. So he has questions based on that. And then he says, what's different? Havdalah is learned out from Kiddush. The same way we sanctify Shabbos when it starts, you sanctify when it ends with Havdalah. So how come if you were doing something else and then Shabbos happens, you have to interrupt, make Kiddush, and then keep going? But for Havdalah, you're allowed to keep doing it and then make Havdalah later. Why aren't they the same? And a bunch of other questions. So he comes up with his yesod is that Shabbos has two aspects. Shabbos comes by itself every 7 days because Hashem rested. That part was given at Mara. But besides for that, we have to make Shabbos holy. And how do we do that? By making Kiddush. And the stuff that we have to do to make Shabbos holy is learned out from Amor, the parsha we mentioned a few minutes ago from Rashi. Eila Moedei Hashem Asher Tikro Sam Mikra Kodesh, or Eila Moedei Hashem Asher Tikro Sam Madam. And in that parsha, it starts out with Shabbos. So Rabbi Yashaber says for certain things, Shabbos is considered a moed. So just like we have to we also have to declare Shabbos, just like we declare Yom Tov. So one thing we could say from that, he doesn't say it, but you could say that we have an obligation to be mekadesh Yom Tov, and maybe that's the explanation for the Rach that the Rashba in Bava Basra mentioned. I said, according to the Rach, Beis Din has to be mekadesh the Yom Tov itself. I said we don't know exactly how they did it, but maybe it does seem to be a stretch, though, is that the Kiddush of some of the Dayanim that made it the day Yom Tov. But what's stranger is that according to Rav Yashaber, it ends up that Shabbos is a very important element of Shabbos is Kiddush also. We have to make it Shabbos, even though Shabbos comes by itself. But we also, he doesn't exactly say this, but it's almost like you could say that maybe he said it in the Hashkafa part, which doesn't get published, is that the Isra Malacha part that Hashem rested, so we have to rest. That was given at Mara. Those are the negative commandments. But in order to make it special, Shabbos, it's not just enough to refrain from anything. We have to do stuff on Shabbos to make it holy. We mentioned the Neshama Yasera last time, and the Shita Mekubatzes mentions, I think we mentioned it, that the Neshama Yasera allows us to learn Torah better and see the world better on Shabbos. So we do something special for Shabbos. We eat a special Shabbos meal. We make a special davening. We have Kriyas Torah. So it could be that those parts, that was given from Har Sinai, the positive commandments of Shabbos. So, and then actually, he mentions explicitly our Gemara for the following point. What was it? He mentions the Gemara that we just read. Oops. Here. Now we can understand the opinion of the Tana in the Sugi and Beitza Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph that taught in front of Ravina that according to Rabbi you say mekadesh yisrael vehashabes. So we know that we end mekadesh hashabes yisrael vehazmanim. The Tana who is reading in front of Ravina said mekadesh yisrael vehashabes vehazmanim. So Rav Yashaber said based on his yesod that he said that Bnei Yisrael have to be mekadesh Shabbos also. That's what we said mekadesh Yisrael vehashabes. Yisrael has the ability or responsibility to be mekadesh Shabbos, and part of the mekadesh Shabbos isn't necessarily that we have to declare it Shabbos. He says that's part of it, but there's two aspects to it. Is one of them is also Shavach. We have to give praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving us Shabbos. So it's not necessarily so. So part of it is praise that Hashem gave us Shabbos, but so because Shabbos is also sanctified through Yisrael, you should mention Yisrael first. So Rabbi Yashaber mentions this opinion that we don't paskin like, but that would be a logic you would mention mekadesh Yisrael vehazmanim. Excuse me, mekadesh Yisrael vehashabes vehazmanim. We don't paskin that way, but that would be a logic for it. Okay, so then this is a side point, also a different side point, I promise I did not go into any of this stuff thinking about any of Rav Yashaber's Torah specifically, but some questions I never heard any of these topics discussed except there, so it brought me there. Rav Yashaber has a whole yahrzeit share. These two books, well, this is from the first printing. And this one is they reprinted it about 20 years ago. Well, that's a little bit more than 20 years already. More than 20 years ago. 2002. Motzad Rav Kook republished it because these were out of print and impossible and couldn't get. So every year, Rav Yashaber would give a huge 4-hour share for his father's yahrzeit, which was Gimel Shvat, a little bit more than a month ago. And it usually was 2 hours in halacha. He would come up with a bunch of questions on Gemaras and this and that and Rambams, and then he'd make a yesod. He'd say a certain principle, and then all the questions would fall like dominoes. And then he would spend 2 hours in Yeshiva University, 4-hour share in Yiddish, and people who didn't learn, they would come. It was the event of the year, the only Torah they learned all year. These people, I don't know how much they understood, but it was a big event. And oh yeah, Oh, yeah. So that's wonderful to hear someone who was a witness to that. So Moshe was at a few of them when he lived in New York. One on Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Va'ed. And uh and so then he's 2 hours in halacha and then 2 hours hashkafa, like agadata is related to it. So those didn't get published, except sometimes they got published in the Yiddish newspaper. That part. The Chag HaSmicha was about every 3 years. They were. So Levi Mostavsky, the executive director of the CRC, he told us something we didn't know this. His father got smicha in the 50s from Rabbi Yashabera, and at a certain time, like 1955, in the middle of the 50s, Rav Aaron, even though he was teaching Chaim Berlin in the morning, in the afternoon, he was the Rav's assistant for the smicha share, and the Rav was so before the Rav's wife died, that happened. Her Yortzit's coming up, right around Purim time. He was very, very hard on the boys. He was almost like a tyrant. I certainly saw the word terror used by Talmidim. And then he got older, he got milder. But if they say something bad, he say, that you're du bist a coup. He would he had no tolerance for anything that wasn't perfect. Right. And ended up he gave them smicha, but it was so Levi Mazavsky said that Rav Aaron every day for hours had to go from boy to boy and say, "Oh, what my brother said in share, he didn't really mean it. He's not mad at you." And that's what he had to do for the whole year. So we didn't know that Rav Aaron's official job that for one of those years was being the Rav's the assistant for the smicha share. But he told me this about a year ago. It was sometime in the it was in the mid 1950s. There's a story. The Rav used to not read the Gemara. He would have a boy read the Gemara, and then when he wanted to say something, he'd say, "Now, what about this?" And it happened that way. But he didn't read the Gemara himself. So one day he had a list of the boys in the share. The register I gave him. He didn't know everyone's name in the share, so he called on Friedman. And Friedman didn't prepare the Gemara well that day. So Friedman said, he's not here today. So the Rav said, okay, then you read. So that boy tried to get out of it. It didn't work.
One of the words it says when they were seeing him, there was two or three.
It could have been in a group. I don't know.
So what are you going to be tested? Instead of going to be tested on there. You really think you know bear? You scream. You survive.
Oh, so your friend got smicha from the Rav. So there's a different yahrzeit share that he gave about mentioning yaaleh veyavo in Rosh Chodesh, and he starts out with an interesting thing. See, I haven't looked at it in a long time, and we don't. And because Jeff brought it up, I'm mentioning it. But if you forgot Rosh Chodesh in Marav, we don't repeat it. Now, some came up with the following claim: if it's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, and you forgot on both days, Mamanavshach, one of those nights you weren't Yotze your Shmona Esrei. Because if one of the nights had to have been Rosh Chodesh and you forgot it, so it'd be a problem. But whatever, but for Gemara, for whatever reason, for Marav, it's not Ma'akev. Maybe because there was no real korban brought at night when we say Marav. I don't remember the exact reason. But the Chayadim brings Rav Avli Pasveler that if you forgot Hamelach HaKadosh on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, you don't have to repeat Shmona Esrei because it's like forgetting yaaleh veyavo on Rosh Chodesh night. The Chayadim brings down such an opinion. And he starts out by saying, my father said we definitely don't paskin like it, it's wrong. And then as part of the shir, he has other questions. He gave an answer to give give a logic for that shita. But okay, where are we? Okay, back to Eruv issues. Amr of Huna. Oh no. Okay, Amr of Chia Barashi Amarav. Where are we here? We are on 17A2, the top of the second column. Amr of Chia Barashi Amarav. You're allowed to make. Oh, here. We mentioned this idea at the beginning. So we mentioned way at the beginning today. Rashi says that the blind man who forgot to leave his Erev Tavshilin, the second year was Rosh Hashanah. And Rashi said, Rashi had to be Rosh Hashanah because if it was Yantif, we're going to see that you can make a condition. If today is really Yantif, I don't need an Erev Tavshilin. I can cook tomorrow. And if today's not really Yantif and tomorrow's really Yantif, I'm making Erev Tavshilin now. On Thursday for Yantif, that's on Friday. So this is the Gemara. Rav Chia Barashi said the name of Rav. A person is allowed to make an Erev Tchumim on Yom Tov itself for the next day. So meaning you forgot to make it before on Wednesday before before Yantif started, or this year Taka Shavuos is on a Friday Shabbos. For us, it's Friday Shabbos. In Eretz Yisrael, it's Friday, and they have a regular Shabbos, but they have to keep a 2-day Yantif. The second day is Shabbos. Well, yeah, it doesn't apply to Eretz Yisrael, but you can make the Erev Tavshilin on Yantif, the first day of Yantif, with the Tanai. So you say if today is like the way I said, if today is really not Yantif, so I'm allowed to make an Erev Tavshilin today for tomorrow, and if tomorrow is really Yantif. And if today is really Yantif, I don't even need an Erev Tavshilin for tomorrow. So what I'm saying now doesn't have any effect anyway. Amar Rava, so Rava says, wait, that was the Erev Tchumen. That halacha was about Erev Tchumen. We wanted to extend the Tchum. But Rabbi says, you could even do that for an Erev Tavshilin. Manda Amar Erev Tchuvim, Koshakin Erev Tavshilin. So the first opinion, Rav Chia Bar Ashi, who says you can make an Erev Tchumen, he certainly would agree that you can make an Erev Tavshilin. Umanda Amar Erev Tavshilin, but Rava, who says you're allowed to do this for an Erev Tavshilin, Aval Erev Tchumen lo. It wouldn't necessarily follow that you could also make an Erev Tchumen, my taima. Why not? You're not allowed to acquire residence for a Shabbos when it's already a Shabbos, not literally a Shabbos. It's similar to this. It's different words, but I think it's the same exact idea that we saw from Rabbi a few lines above on the previous amru. Rabbi said you can't make an Erev Tchumim on Friday Yantif for Shabbos because you're already usher to do that on. So it's slightly different than Rabbi, but it's the end result is the same. Rabbi says it's usher to go there on Shabbos, so on Friday, so you can't go there and do something that you couldn't do today for tomorrow when it's also usher. He's saying that you're by making the Erev Tchumim, you're designating that this is my residence by leaving the food there, so you can't make your residence there on a day when it's already Shabbos Yom. It's very similar Svar to Rebbe. I don't think it's the exact same Svar. Taner Rabbana, we learned in the Beitza. Ain oven miyom tov l'chavero. You're not allowed to bake on one day of Yontif for the next day, even though you're allowed to cook food or roast food, but not bake. The emes amru. In truth, they said. So the emes amru. Well, let's talk about what they said before we say. There's a very significant to the word, the phrase emes amru. Mamala isha kol hakadira basar. A woman's allowed to fill the pot completely up with meat, even though she only needs one piece. Meaning, once you're allowed to cook for Yantif, you're allowed to cook more. If you wouldn't be allowed to cook for Yantif, you're not allowed to cook for anything. But if you just need to make one thing for yourself, you're allowed to make the whole pot and make for 10 people, even though you're not expecting anyone else. Mamale nachtam chavish shalmayim. A nachtam literally means a baker. He could fill a whole barrel of water, even though he only needs a jug's worth for water, but once you need it for something for Yontif use, we allow you to do extra. But in regard to baking itself, he's only allowed to bake the amount he needs. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, Mamala isha kol hataner pas. The woman's allowed to fill the whole oven up with bread. Because bread breaks better when the oven is full. So the Tanakama holds, even though you're allowed to cook extra, you're not allowed to bake more. Probably because okay, so Rashi says the reason is because when you cook, it's one act of cooking. If you stir the pot, whether it's one piece or whether it's a whole pot, you do one stir, whatever. But when you bake, you have to, in those days, what was their bread? It was like pita. They would throw the dough on the side of the oven and they would have to scrape it off with a special tool, I think called a merdas or something. And so because you'd have to do that many times for bread that you don't need, it's like doing something that didn't need to be done for Yontif. You could have avoided it. That's what Rashi says the reason is. But Rabbi Shimon Elazar says you're allowed to bake more than what you need, because the bread comes out better when it's made. The whole oven is filled with bread. So this bread is better from the fact that there's other bread with it. So because it's helping this particular bread that you need, you're allowed to bake the extra because it's helping this particular bread. Rabbi halacha Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Rabbi says we pass Rabbi Shimon Elazar. So we'll just end with this final thing. So what's be'emes amru? So be'emes amru, Art Scroll brings from, I think, Rashi above Mitzia. Okay, so the Art Scroll says, in truth, they said, is generally used to indicate halacha Moshe misinai, an oral law received by Moshe at Sinai. We see the Rav to Trumos 2:1. However, Bava Mitzia, Rashi there in Bava Mitzia says that be'emes amru is kind of like a halacha psuka. Simple halacha. This is a halacha. There's not much to he and ha and say about it. You can either do it or you can't. There's not really a discussion. So it's quick, be'emes amru. There is something in the fourth parak of brachos of halacha psuka that you shouldn't go into davening, and this is going to be a problem for us in a couple of weeks, because in a couple of weeks after we change the clock, we're going to have to give share before mincha, not after mincha. You're not really supposed to daven mincha after you've been deeply thinking of halachic issues, because you're still thinking on that. You can't have proper kavana in davening. So the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah in the fourth parak of brachos says, you mentioned a simple halacha that there's nothing much to think about. I think one of the examples is Benos Yisrael was strict, and they sat Shiva Nikim when they saw any amount of blood like a mustard seed. That's what they did. So there's really not much discussion. You could say, why did they do that? Why were they strict or this? But it just is. So it seems to be that the be'emes amru is similar to that. Except the Bartanurim from other places, it seems it's halacha Moshe misinai. And the problem is that some of these halachos that we say be'emes amru on, it seem to be a derabbanan. How could it be halacha Moshe misinai if it's a derabbanan? So in a different yahrzeit share, Rav Yashaber talks about it. Now this share partially discusses the Rishon Rebbe's tchelas. So tchelas, a certain Hasidic Rebbe, the Rishon Rebbe, thought that he rediscovered tchelas, and the Beis Halevi says don't wear it. And so he discusses that. And basically, Rav Yashaber says is that there's a type of Masorah that has to be father to son, father to son. And he doesn't say it in the share, though I didn't have time to look at the whole share, but Pesach is that type of Masorah. My father told me that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim on this night, and it was a big rush, and it was a big miracle, and a big part of the Seder is Masorah. When I became associate rabbi here, they had the Ari Zavitofsky and Ari, the two Aris had one of their special Masorah dinners. So the shul paid for me to go to this 12-course meal. I don't think I ate for 3 days after it. But some of the things they did there, they brought a certain thing. I guess they paid the health department off. They brought a certain type of bird in, and it was in a cage. And they said that, I think it was Rav Kapach, who the blue, it's behind the tissues there in the front, the Persia Mishnah Rambam. He had actual manuscripts from the Rambam's handwriting that he brought with him, or his father brought with him from Yemen to Eretz Yisrael, and he translated from the Arabic into modern Hebrew. So Rav Kappa, whether it's from some are from Rav Kappa and some are from other, so they said this type of bird is a kosher bird. We have a Masorah that this is a kosher bird. So they were given over a Masorah that they were taught, or so let's say Ashkenazim and probably even Sephardim aren't allowed to eat the grasshoppers anymore because we don't have the Masorah. The Teimanim from Yemen, they lived there and they had those coming every year or every few years, they had a Masorah because their father said this is a kosher species that we're allowed to eat. But we don't have that Masorah anymore. So Rav Yashaber said that this tchelas, what the Beis Halevi meant, was that this tchelas, to know which animal or snail, whatever it is, we use to make the Masorah. Once the chain was broken, even if we have 1,000 proofs, it's based on the Masorah of my father telling me, who knows from his father, no tchelas. So in that, he mentions other things about Masorah and halacha moshe misinai, and he says, actually took a picture of one page, is that he said, listen to this question. Purim is midrabanan, right? It's not in the Torah, it happened after. So if you learn Megillah or Hilchos Purim, are you mekayim a mitzvah of Talmud Torah midiraisa or only a mitzvah of Talmud Torah midrabanan? He says, it's pashut, it's simple that even though Purim is midirabanan, when you learn Torah about Purim, it's midiraisa. You're mekayim Talmud Torah midiraisa. So he said, I took a picture, so it's easier if I go this one page than to look in the Sefer here. No, but if we learn Mesachas Megillah, let's say from Tu B'Shvat we started to learn Mesachas Megillah. For that month that we learn Mesachas Megillah, is it Torah only midrabanan or is it Torah midiraisa? So he says it's only midrabanan, but once it became Torah, it's Torah, and when you learn it, you fulfill your Torah fulfillment of learning Torah. It's ridiculous to say that there's no kiyum, right? There's no kiyum midiraisa of learning Torah. So you could say, you want to kvetch, why did Hashem have to tell Moshe Rabbeinu all the conclusions that were ever going to be concluded at Tov Kol Hadoros? So you could kvetch and say the opposite. If it wouldn't be that Moshe received it at Torah, then it wouldn't be Torah, what you said. I guess you could fetch the opposite. He clearly doesn't say that, and I don't think it's good. So he says, so once divrei sofrim, once rabbinic things are now included in the Masorah, when you learn it, you fulfill Torah Shebeksav. There's two parts of it. Learning and action are applicable to it. Therefore, there's halachas that are midrabanan, but were given as a halacha Moshe misinai. Not that it was actually given from Moshe, but it works through the same way that halacha Moshe misinai. You have to accept it. There's no reason. This is what it is. Pashut Nemar, and this is how you do it in Yisrael. For example, there's halacha that in the lands of Ammon and Moab, you take Meiser Ani on Shemitah, even though Shemitah is usually exempt. And this is something that you do. It's halacha of Meiser, something you do. So when certain says, I have a Kabbalah that this is how we paskin, it became transmitted, it was accepted and was given to be given over as an actual Kabbalah, and we can't complain about it because there's a different thing that some places if something's halacha Moshe misinai, there can't be a machlokus about it. But in some cases, they through certain, let's say Mesachtas Edios and certain things, they said it, and we said, okay, this is halacha. So basically, Rav Yashaber says there's some things that are derabanan, but they became part of the Masorah, like halacha Moshe misinai. That's what it is. There's no. So it could be, he may say it, but I didn't have time to go through the order because each of these shiurim are about 20 pages. So when we say, but when the Gemara here said about amru, so the Bartanura in Truma seems to say it's halacha Moshe misinai. According to Rashi in Bava Metzia Daf Samach, It seems to be it's just this is how it doesn't say anything about halacha misinai. It's a simple halacha. This is what it is. There's not really anything to say about it. I mean, you're not going to complain, or this is what it is. So Rabbi Yashaber kind of fuses those two things together in this share by saying that there's a type of midrabanan, which is like halacha misinai. So it's not that it's literally halacha misinai, but it's like. So that could be the pshat in the statement of be'emes amru. So the halacha misinai, the fact that 3 walls of the sukkah, that you only need 2 walls and the third is only a tafach. Halacha misinai. It's right. So halacha misinai, they are chukim. Tefillin have to be black. They have to be square. There's 10 halacha misinai about tefillin. All these halacha misinai, there is no. It's not in the Torah. There doesn't seem to be a reason for it, but yeah, it's to a certain extent it is like a chok. But in Paraduma, we're allowed to learn halachos and it's thing, but it's not necessarily halacha psuka. There's what to learn about it. I mean, there's what to learn about the square of the tefillin too. But emes amru. So yashar koach to everyone.